Hi folks, welcome to RJ Impact. Today we're going to be diving deep into the murky waters of deception and chicanery. You know, I promised a top 10 fraud countdown a while back and I've been knee deep in research ever since. When you try to make comparisons of fraud over time, it's difficult to deal with the value because of inflation and so on. The impact's also difficult to assess. For example, a small value fraud that wipes out a number of people and their pension schemes, etc., might have more impact on a personal level than a big fraud that targets millions of dollars from an insurance company or something like that. It's all relative, as Einstein said. Anyway, in doing my research, I actually went through a lot of historic frauds, so I decided to do this video focusing on some frauds that perhaps you haven't heard of before, and I've definitely kept out of the high-tech side of things this time. And the reason for that is that originally I planned to focus on pre-internet scams as being low-tech, as you might say, and then I thought, well, what about all of those sneaky wire transfer frauds? And then don't get me started on the telegram frauds of the 1800s. Those were the Wild West days of communication technology fraud, I guess. Anyway, I allowed myself things like telescopes as being tech, but not too tech, if that makes sense. So buckle up, we're about to uncover some of the most jaw-dropping frauds in history, from telegram trickery to telescope tomfoolery. Hope you see what I did there. First example is one I've talked about before, and it's the Great Moon Hoax. No, not the didn't they walk ... The earlier one, yeah. The Great Moon Hoax of 1835. Anyway, I've covered this in some detail in another video and I won't go into a lot of detail here, and if you're interested, you can find it here. Shameless plug. Ooh, note to self, take out the word shameless plug when you edit this. Anyway, this elaborate hoax, published in the New York Sun newspaper, claimed that famous astronomer Sir John Herschel had made incredible discoveries on the moon, including vast forests, bat-like creatures, and even bipedal beavers. The story, complete with detailed descriptions and illustrations, captivated the public, although it was eventually exposed as fiction. Today's impact from this? Well, nothing too much, I guess, unless you take the point of view that newspapers can write pretty much what they want, true or false, and people will believe them. That might ring true today as well. Our next fraud is the oldest fraud known, or at least that I could find anyway. Now, it's safe to say that fraud has been going on since mankind was able to communicate. You can envisage the scenario. Here, you give me that food you collected, as I need to go over here, and I'll tell you where to find twice as much over there in that direction. Okay, that was a bit glib, but you can imagine it happening. Anyway, nothing was documented about that particular conversation, so it doesn't count. However, imagine you were a great leader and just lost a great battle. It's not going to stop you promoting it as a win and then document it so that it can be seen by all for eternity, or at least for thousands of years. At the Great Temple in Abu Simbel, there remains, carved into the walls, a reminder of one of the greatest military lies ever told. Ramesses the Great, often regarded as the most powerful pharaoh to have ruled the ancient Egyptian empire, embarrassingly led his men into a trap at the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittite Empire in 1274 BC. The perils of history written by the victors, especially when the victor is more self-assured than strictly accurate. Anyway, this is what Ramesses said. Take yours truly, Ramesses the Great, pharaoh of all pharaohs, god-king amongst mortals. Yes, yes, I know some whispers call the Battle of Kadesh a loss, a debacle even. Preposterous. They clearly haven't witnessed the majestic carvings at Abu Simbel, have they? Now these, my friends, are the chronicles of a glorious triumph, etched in stone for eternity. Let me paint you a picture, shall I? The year is 1274 BC. We can all ponder how he knew that. Kadesh, the sun blazing down on my chariot as I lead the charge, a whirlwind of Egyptian might, cleaving through the Hittite hordes like a lion through gazelles. Arrows bounced harmlessly off my divine aura, spears shattered against my celestial pectorals. My chariot, drawn by stallions, the colour of Ra's burning chariot, blazed a trail of glory through their ranks. The Hittites scattered like desert dust before a simoom, their king Muwatalli reduced to whimpering pleas for mercy, begging for mercy like a whipped cur. Victory absolute and glorious was mine. Of course, some naysayers might mention a slight ambush, perhaps a few tactical missteps, maybe even a panicked retreat under cover of darkness. But details, who remembers the hiccups when the final score is etched in eternal granite? At Abu Simbel, Luxor and Abydos, my valiant challenge mows through the Hittite ranks. My arrows pierce their hearts with the flurry of Horus. The Nile itself trembles before my might, so I let the historians whisper their doubts. I, Ramesses the Great, have spoken, and my words are carved in stone, bathed in the eternal light of Ra. Okay, so I might have ad-libbed one or two words he said there, but the short story is Ramesses fought the Hittites at Kadesh. He lost badly. He was actually forced to sign the first ever non-aggression pact. However, he told his people he won, and they memorialised his fraudulent claim in 1274 BC. His victorious version has been seen for now around 3,300 years. To my mind, frauds will always repeat themselves and people are always the common factor, and you might say that's obvious, but it is the nature of people that's the common factor, I would say. A key difference perhaps. Anyway, how can I make that claim? Well, partly because it's my opinion and I can have whatever opinion no matter how half-baked I want, but more seriously because I can paint a compare and contrast for you. Let's take a look at these two frauds side by side. Our first involves the charitable corporation, incorporated in 1725, and it was set up to provide microloans to working people. That was somewhat innovative at the time, nobody else was doing it. However, it wasn't long before the directors were dipping their hands into the cookie jar, as it were, and using those cookies for their own purposes. Now, when these directors got onto the board, they reduced it so there was a very small group of about 5 directors, and they were buying shares with the company's funds for their own benefit. Now, the misuse of funds started rumours in around 1731, and when there was an inquisition, the accounting practices were found to be extremely bad, with irregular records, missing pledges, missing millions, and the whole company imploded. Rumours leading up to that actually led to a parliamentary investigation, and the outcome was that the company filed for bankruptcy. Shareholders received partial government bailout. The directors, by the way, were well connected to the government, and the scale of the fraud in this case was millions. The apparent equivalent in today's money is around $108 million. And it was actually a regulated landscape, although far less than we would have today. So that's it, that's a true story. I'll give you a couple of other elements to this. The bookkeeper of the company was given the whole company to look after from beginning to end, all the records, and of course he was actually in league with the directors. By the time the public found out that there really were no books, he was actually out of the country. Although it was called the Charitable Corporation, it was actually a profit-making organisation that did make some charitable donations as well. The British Museum itself came under heavy fire to repay donations that it had received from that company. And a large majority of the shareholders were women. My conjecture here is because they were investing in their own right, they were probably single women, perhaps spinsters, and this is total speculation. I suspect a lot of them were wiped out effectively. They had all their eggs in one basket, but that is total speculation. let's rewind somewhat and let's replay what we've just heard. Our target company for this comparison is FTX. That was created in its final form in 2019. It was working in this new marketplace of cryptocurrency, creating an exciting bubble of investment opportunity, some people getting very rich as a result, innovative financial products. The original form of FTX was as Alameda, an investment company through and through. Now the CEO or directors of FTX diverted monies from FTX to Alameda. Just like the charitable corporation, there was only 4 or 5 people that actually ran the group, although we do know in FTX's case there were managers of subsidiaries. It seems by all accounts that Sam Bankman-Fried used the company's money as his own and invested it for his own personal gain. Just like the charitable corporation, it was rumours that started, and these turned out to be true, that ended up creating the final downfall. The accounting in the FTX group has been slammed by the administrator for being pretty non-existent. Public outcry and regulatory scrutiny followed. It filed for bankruptcy and millions of investors were impacted, and the financial markets themselves were impacted in this case. Political ties tick. The scale of the fraud was bigger in the case of FTX, even relative to the time, we'd have to say. It's difficult to compare the regulatory landscape directly between the two companies, but it's fair to say that back in the 1800s it was less developed from a loan perspective, and today it's not that developed from a cryptocurrency perspective. I think that's fair. And the current status, the story's concluded in the case of charitable corporation and still ongoing in the case of FTX, the collection of all the monies and the final reckoning, the loss to investors. By the way, the charitable corporation was a British company, and it was the British Parliament that ended up bailing some of its colleagues, I guess you'd say, out. Now, I hope you'll agree with me that makes a pretty compelling case for a very similar story happening over 100 years apart. Let's get away from money for a while. Princess Anastasia was the daughter of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. In 1918, Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks killed the Tsar and his whole family, the Romanovs, in 1918 following the Russian Revolution. Rumours quickly spread that Princess Anastasia, the so-called Grand Duchess Anastasia of Russia, had escaped. A number of people over the years were cited as potentially being Anastasia. However, of these, Anna Anderson, as we're going to call her, is by far the best known. We first found out about her claims when she tried to apparently end her own life by jumping off a bridge in Berlin. She was then taken to an asylum in Dusseldorf, and it was to the staff in the asylum that she alleged herself to be Anastasia. Not very compelling so far, I would say. However, apparently she did have a very close resemblance to the princess, and also appeared to know everything there is to know about the Russian royal family that you would expect the real princess to know. She was actually compelling to a lot of people, and even some relatives of Anastasia believed her. However, a lot still didn't, and in 1927 a former housemate or alleged housemate of her claimed she was actually called Franziska Shanskowska. Anna, or Anastasia, maintained a story until she died in the 80s. Now, when the burial site after that of the Romanovs was discovered, eventually DNA tests confirmed that Anastasia was amongst the deceased, and all of that family and their members had been executed in 1918. In my opinion, it's somewhat sad that Anastasia, or Anna, obviously had problems, and the sycophants and hangers-on, in my opinion, didn't help, and possibly either led to the delusion continuing or fraud continuing, whichever, which lasted her whole life. Who was she herself? We'll never know. Operation Mincemeat. Yep. By the way, mincemeat is a derivation of minced meat, which in many English-speaking countries, the US up there, tend to call ground meat. Minced meat is also the filling of mince pies, a sweet pie containing brown sugar, raisins, apples, currants, and is one of the things traditionally made and eaten at Christmas time in the UK. I'm a big fan. What Operation Mincemeat referred to specifically, I don't know, but I do have my suspicions. And if all that is a bit far-fetched, Google it and you'll see I have a point. Anyway, let's get to the point. So, in 1943, the Allied forces in Europe were planning an offensive against the Axis powers, that's German-supported powers, in southern Italy, targeting Sicily specifically, and they wanted to put Germany off the scent that this was going on. This is where Operation Mincemeat, a disinformation campaign, started. It started with a body. The deceased Glyndwr Michael, who was a homeless man, was dressed as a fictional British officer carrying forged documents suggesting an upcoming Allied invasion of Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. The British created a whole backstory for him, and the body, which was identified as Major William Martin, was strategically placed off the Spanish coast, ensuring its discovery and retrieval by German agents. He had a host of information on him which disseminated falsehoods. So the forged documents detailed troop movements, deployments, landing sites, and other fabricated plans designed to convince the German High Command of the Greece-Sardinia invasion. And they did believe it. Decrypted German messages confirmed the success of Mincemeat, with German forces diverted from Sicily to Greece and Sardinia. Now Hitler, his trust in future intelligence was badly shaken by this, leading him to disregard crucial information about D-Day and Operation Market Garden later in the war. So this fraud, or deception I suppose you call it, is of significant historic importance. It stands as a remarkable example of a successful wartime deception, clearly, and it significantly impacted the course of the war. Now, the critical role of intelligence gathering, strategic communication, if not writ large, certainly was after this, and the potential of well-executed disinformation campaigns probably continues to this day, wouldn't you say? There are an amazing set of coincidences relating to all of this. Let me tell you what they are. So, the idea for this whole escapade actually did come from fiction, and it came from a novel by a man called Basil Thomson, who I'm sure you've never heard of. I hadn't either. Now, whilst no one had heard of Basil, there was one person who actually had heard of him and read his books, a guy called Ian. That's Ian Fleming. At that time in the war, this guy, Ian Fleming, was the assistant to General Godfrey. He was the head of naval intelligence and later became the model for M in the James Bond stories, written of course by Fleming. Fleming proposed the idea from Thomson's novel to Godfrey. I find that amazing. Okay, so that was that, and you're right in thinking I didn't comment on the Telegram fraud. You'll have to wait till the next instalment of this particular series to come across those. There's probably going to be 3, definitely 2 in this series. Also included is a story about a war forgery that led one senior member of the German Reich worrying in World War II that it might breach international law. Yes, you're right, I will touch on the irony when we cover that. So I'm going to spend most of the next video, maybe half plus, on that particular fraud, and then we're going to flip back to the 1800s where there are as many anecdotal cases of frauds that you could ever want. I'll rattle through those at a pace. They're like mini short stories in their own right, and very often they're just apocryphal. You can't verify them one way or another. And I'm going to call that the snake oil section. So, I bet you didn't believe you'd go from ancient Egypt to World War II via the moon and micro-lending, and then come across cryptocurrency by way of the communist revolution. If you can persuade anybody that you did, respect. Remember, in fraud, the art of the deception is not in the delivering, but it is in the persuading someone else that you can deliver. Bye for now.